Hello everyone, good day. As promised, I am going to record a separate video recording for our lessons solely for the purpose of making sure that walang ad-libs no in between lessons para din hindi masyadong draggy yung videos that I am going to upload. So earlier this week, we talked about invertebrate diversity no. Invertebrate, alam natin, are any animals that lack a vertebral column or backbone, no? Or that is in contrast to, say, for example, cartilaginous or bony vertebrates. And if we take into account the totality of all animals that are discovered to date, more than 90% of all living animal species are actually invertebrates. So they are very diverse in nature, very widely distributed, okay? And invertebrates are known to be important, no? In many ways na pwede siyang magamit for human use. However, yung drawbacks niya din are, for example, known to be like they are agricultural pests, or some of them are parasitic, or if hindi man sila nag-cause ng disease, they can be agents of transmission of some infections, not to humans and other animals. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about these diverse organisms. Okay, I separated this into a two-part series mainly because it's very lengthy if gagawin lang siya in one setting. So I hope makatulong ito in your lesson or in your preparations rather or review, especially that in our synchronous meeting, I do not have the assurance no that I am well understood, or like if I tawag dyan, audible because some of you raised concerns of intermittent connections. Okay? So for this lesson, we talked about invertebrates, and basically we have to accomplish three learning objectives. First is to categorize animal phyla based on their morphological and physiological differences, assess the validity of basing animal phylogeny based on both molecular and morphological data, and assess the importance of animals. So yung first part ng lesson natin on animal diversity, we talk about the salient features of animals, no? So dapat alam na natin yung pinagkaiba ng radial versus bilateral symmetry. Okay? Radially symmetrical animals, say for example, yung sea anemone natin dito, ibig sabihin nito, these are animals that can be bisected into equal halves by any longitudinal plane that passes through the central axis. So kahit saan mo siya hatiin, as long as equal yung parts, you will still get equal pieces, no? Okay, equal halves. Bilaterally symmetrical animals naman, like yung pagong natin dito, okay, it can only be bisected into equal halves in only one plane. We call it the mid-sagittal plane, and it will give you mirror images. Okay? So dapat klaro na yan sa atin. Another way to annotate animals is in terms of their body cavity, di ba, yung acelomate, pseudocelomate, and coelomate. So as we talk about complexity of animal systems, acelomate would constitute those rudimentary organisms, like say for example we have the flatworms, no? Acelomate, yung analogy natin dito, yung baunan na walang space for baunan. So think of the baunan as the body cavity, which is supposedly to contain the visceral organs, the internal organs of an organism. So instead na meron siyang body cavity to house these organs, ano yung nangyayari? It is directly embedded, no? In a tissue that's derived from the mesoderm, this part right here. Okay? This pink portion right here. Sa pseudocoelomate organisms naman, like for example, yung ating roundworms, okay? Meron siya nung body cavity, but the body cavity right here is not totally lined by tissue that's derived from the mesoderm. So parang madaling maintindihan natin if we put it sa analogy natin, no? In an analogy, yung baunan na walang compartment. So meron kang space for the body for the tawag dyan for the internal organs, pero walang compartmentalizations. Okay? And we also have the coelomate. Coelomate are those in a higher forms of animals na kung saan each of these internal organs are housed or is surrounded rather by tissues that's derived from the mesoderm. Okay? So dapat klaro na yan sa atin ngayon. Okay? And also about the salient feature of the embryonic development as soon as the zygote or yung fertilized egg natin is formed. So it's well, tawag dyan, exemplified in this illustration right here, shown in my pointer. So dapat klaro na yan sa atin yung cleavage, and then nagpo-form tayo ng blastula, and then the blastula will later on become a gastrula, okay? And then nagkakaroon tayo ng primitive gut or yung archenteron, at yung opening will become the blastopore. Okay? Now the fate of the blastopore, whether it will form first the mouth or the anus, will also be can also be used as a metric to delineate organisms or animals rather, whether they are protostome or deuterostome. Okay? In protostome, mouth would develop first from the blastopore, whereas anus naman yung magde-develop from the blastopore if it's for deuterostome. Okay? Napag-usapan din natin yung about the 8-cell stage, spiral and determinate. Spiral and determinate, ibig sabihin, at the 8-cell stage, think of it as a quadrant on top of another quadrant, and if the upper quadrant is not directly an overlay of the lower quadrant, like this case, hindi siya exactly na nagkakalapat. That's an example of spiral 8-cell stage. Determinate, ibig sabihin, each of these cells at this stage right here, alam na yung kanyang fate, kung anong magiging tissue siya or kung saang organ siya magiging parte. Okay? That is in contrast with deuterostome development, whereas radial ang type of 8-cell stage, ibig sabihin directly overlay yung upper quadrant with the lower quadrant. Tingnan nyo yung cell dito sa taas, directly overlay siya. Directly siya na nakapatong. Okay? Indeterminate, ibig sabihin any of these cells can later on become any tissue or any part of an organ. Okay? That's also one way to differentiate. In terms of coelom formation, okay, you just follow this red, Yung red dito sa coelom, for protostome development, it starts as these slits from the mesoderm. Whereas dito naman, yung coelom would start from outpocketings from the mesoderm. So that's also one way to differentiate protostome and deuterostome. Apart from yung alam natin kung which comes first, So dapat klaro na yan sa atin ngayon at this point. Okay? So yung first part ng lecture natin on invertebrate diversity will be on phylum Porifera. And these are basically yung ating sponges. Wala sila nung gut, nung muscles, nervous system, polarity, as well as some key metazoan genes. And their body plan is relatively simple, And that is maybe the reason why they were not really regarded as animals before, because they are sessile, When we talk about animals, they are usually active movers. But in the case of sponges, it's an exception. Okay? And sponges possess yung flagellated cells natin that we call choanocytes. And these choanocytes are embedded sa loob ng surface, in the inner surface of the sponges. Okay? And sponges are capable of both asexual and sexual reproduction. And in terms of the germ layers, sponges are diploblastic. Ibig sabihin, wala sila nung true na mesoderm layer. Okay? So most of them are actually filter feeders, This is facilitated by trapping particles that pass through the internal channel of the organism. Now, paano nila ginagawa yun? Take note yung ating choanocytes, Yung nasa loob na cells, And these are actually flagellated. So what happens is water would pass through yung small pores sa sponges that we call ostium, ostia kapag plural. Now, this water would carry along it yung suspended particles or suspended organisms that will be trapped by the flagella of these zoonocytes that's embedded on the inside of the sponges. Okay? So what happens if natrap niya yun, kakainin niya yun, and then it will release the water in this big na opening on one end that we call osculum. Okay? So very direct, very simple rather yung kanyang body plan as compared to other animals. Okay? And they can survive in all depth, no? But they prefer mostly yung part of the sunlit zone of the ocean. Okay? Yung part of the ocean where there is enough sunlight, mainly because they need the organisms that need sunlight. They do not really need directly the sunlight kasi hindi naman sila uh, uh, nag-carry out ng photosynthesis. But instead, they need the organisms that depend on sunlight. And what are these organisms? These are the photosynthetic microorganisms na pwede nilang kainin. Something na hindi nila ma-afford if they are in the abyssal part of the ocean. Okay? And yung internal skeleton ng sponges, ang ginagamit to distinguish between classes. So meron tayong 4 classes under this phylum. We have Calcarea, Hexactinellida, Demospongiae, Homoscleromorpha. Yung Calcarea natin, from the word calca, no, has something to do with calcium, right? These are basically sponges with spicules. Spicules or yung kanyang internal skeleton that's made of calcium carbonate. Okay? It can be in the form of, say, calcite or aragonite. Okay? Both are actually forms of calcium carbonate. We also have Hexactinellida, wherein yung kanyang spicules naman are made up of siliceous hexactin. Okay? Silica and hexactin. Okay? And you have Demospongiae. Yung kanyang spicules naman are needle-like and is usually made up yung ating stiffened na collagen that we call yung spongin. Okay? And we have Homoscleromorpha. This is actually a sister clade of Calcarea, and they lack many common characteristics like a head and a mouth, but they are composed of both Homoscleromorpha and Calcarea are composed of calcium carbonate na internal skeleton. Pero pinagkaiba lang nila, si Homoscleromorpha, wala siya nung definite na shape. Parang very random and irregular yung kanyang shape. Okay? So that's one way for us to classify sponges. And alam natin that sponges are the basal group of metazoans, no? It's actually, if you try to look at this cladogram right here, okay, you have the porifera. It's actually situated right next to non-metazoan outgroups. Like say, for example, yung ating choanoflagellates, okay? These are protists and even some fungi, no? And that is why they are considered as the most rudimentary form of animals there is. Okay? And sponges are observed to maintain a symbiotic relationship with members of bacteria, archaea, and protista. And they are considered of economic or meron silang industrial importance because of the secondary metabolites that they produce. These are basically compounds, no? Or products that are produced by these organisms which are not directly involved in the normal growth, development, or reproduction of the organism. Okay? An example for this one is in your module, by the way, Aptosubiritoides. This is actually found in the Philippines, and it's ginagamit daw yung secondary metabolite na from this sponge because of compounds that can be key to alleviating life-threatening diseases. Okay? So that's an example, no, ng pwedeng panggamitan ng sponges. Next would be phylum Cnidaria. So Cnidaria, I think very common siya kasi you have the jellyfish, the sea anemones, the corals, all of these organisms are under phylum Cnidaria. And they are very diverse and mainly attributed to three key adaptations. First, meron kasi silang stinging cells, most of them, no? Yung midday na tinatawag natin. And most of them tend to form aggregates, no, yung colonies. So yung advantage of colonial animals compared to solitary animals, kapag colonial, ibig sabihin, mas they can afford better protection to fend off possible predators. And of course, in terms of nutrient acquisition, because they are in one particular niche, so mas efficient yung kanilang pag-acquire ng nutrients from the environment. Also, these organisms are able to undergo dimorphism. Okay? So, this actually includes some of the most beautiful as well as lethal na aquatic species. So say for example, yung Portuguese man of war na pinakita natin kanina, it's not actually a jellyfish, but it's a hydra to be specific, no? It's a multi colonial na organism, no? And yung Portuguese man of war natin dito, okay? This one right here. And it's deadly in a sense that it can inject neurotoxin to its host, no, which can directly kill a fully grown adult man in just 30 minutes if left untreated. Okay? And okay, next would be yung about sa stinging cells, no? I think yung pinaka salient feature about cnidarians would be yung stinging cells. In terms of symmetry, they are radially symmetrical and they are diploblastic, so wala sila nung true na mesoderm layer, no? And they have an incomplete gastrovascular cavity and their body wall is composed of 3 layers with a mesoglea in the middle and wala sila nung well-developed na nervous system. So instead, meron sila nung nerve net, okay? The nerve net would basically just be connected from one point of the organism to another in response to stimuli. Okay? And members of these organisms are mostly marine organisms and are sessile during their polyp phase or yung kanilang flower-like phase, no, as shown here. And then they are planktonic in their medusa phase. And you can see in here, no, yung mesoglea, but by the way, na sinabi natin kanina, yung if this is the cross section of these of a typical cnidarian, and you can see this space right here. This is actually the mesoglea. Okay? And it's divided into 3 major subphyla. So kung yung sponges kanina are divided into 4 based on the composition of its internal skeleton, yung cnidarians naman are divided into 3 major subphyla depending on their phase, no? Anthozoa are basically cnidarians that have polyp, no, with flower-like appearance. Okay? Medusozoa naman are cnidarians na talagang medusa lang yung kanyang face all throughout its life cycle. Okay? And myxozoa are cnidarians that both manifest yung polyp and medusa phase during their life cycle. And phylum Cnidaria, they have these cnidae that's produced inside the specialized cells we call the cnidoblasts. Okay? Yung specialized cnidae na to are referred to as nematocysts, okay, yung stinging cells na sinasabi natin, no? Yung wherein yung kanyang key feature is to facilitate the capture of their food. Okay? Particularly for sedentary and sessile na cnidarians. But for motile na cnidarians, they can also be used for locomotion and also for defense. Okay? And in some cnidarians, yung kanilang stinging cells, you can see right here, it's guarded by this hinge lid, no? Yung parang plastic covered na yan na structure. Ito yung tinatawag natin na operculum, which will be triggered open when there is, if nakasend sila, say for example, ng food. when the nidocyl, okay, yung bristle-like na mechanoreceptor, nidocyl is basically these parang thorn-like structures, no, is stimulated, the nida will be everted quickly to penetrate into the prey as shown in this fish right here, okay, being entrapped by this cnidarian. And there are other forms of nidae, hindi lang nematocyst. Okay? We also have spirocyst, like for example, this one, no? Spirocyst, ibig sabihin parang lasso-like yung string that is fired at the prey. Tychocyst naman, instead of entangling the food source, what they do is they put out a sticky substance that is used to hold on to prey, okay? To hold on to the prey. So that's for Nidaria. So just try to remember their distinguishing na features. Okay? Ctenophores naman, they may be often confused with regular jellyfish from Nidaria, no? Morphologically, they're very much alike, pero I think yung prominent feature nito that will stand out when observing, say for example, any ctenophore would be these rows of ciliary plates as depicted in this figure right here, no? Yung ciliary plates na to. Other textbooks would term this one as teens, and it functions for locomotion along with the statolith, no, in the apical sense organ. This statolith is helping the organism to maintain balance in the water column, just like the otolith of fish. Okay, para mura na siyang scale that's embedded actually in the anterior portion of comb jellies. And they are usually ovoid, they are exclusively ovoid in shape as shown here. Okay? And kung yung sponges are distinguished based on their internal skeleton, kung yung Nidarians are distinguished based on their face, kung medusa, polyp, or both. Yung ctenophores naman, madali lang. Kung meron siyang tentacles, we call them tentaculata, and if wala naman, we call them under nuda, or we group them under nuda. Okay? So very easy for that. And like Nidarians, no, they are also radially symmetrical, and they are diploblastic. So wala sila nung true mesoderm layer. And they are monomorphic, no, or they are monoecious throughout their life cycle. And they are just freely floating, no, although some organisms are known to be sessile or attached to the substrate. And yung feeding mechanism nila is primarily facilitated by what we call colioblasts. Okay, these colioblasts right here, these are actually epidermal glue cells that's attached to their tentacles. Okay, so para siyang tychocyst with that of some Nidarians na kung saan they have these sticky na substances released from these cells that will latch on to their possible food source. And they are mostly hermaphrodites, meaning they can self-fertilize. So very much in common sila, no? Very similar sila with that of Nidarian. We also have platyhelminthes, or more commonly known as the flatworms. They are dorso-ventrally flattened, ribbon-like metazoans, and they can be either free-living and parasitic. So many of these organisms are actually a threat to public health because, say for example, yung tawag dyan, later on, yung bulate ng mga bata are actually that of under platyhelminthes. And they are generally in aquatic ecosystems. However, some can be found in symbiosis with other animals. And unlike yung first three na invertebrates, these flatworms are now triploblastic. So meron na sila nung mesoderm na layer. However, they are a coelomate. So wala silang body cavity kasi nga flat lang sila. And they are non-segmented. So that's one way for you to differentiate platyhelminthes, say for example with annelids. kasi annelids are segmented worms whereas platyhelminthes or flatworms are non-segmented. And at this point, they are already bilaterally symmetrical. And ano nga yung sinabi natin about bilaterally symmetrical organisms? Ito na yung mga organisms na meron silang central control system, no? O yung tinatawag natin na cephalization. Okay? So, for example, yung as you can see in the picture, no, this one is the longitudinal nerve cords, and you can see na meron na siyang localization of these nerve cords, no, sa anterior end ng organism. So, at this point, no, of the organism of our study on invertebrates, meron tayong na-observe na cephalization. Sorry. Okay? In terms of their excretion, they have what we call yung protonephridia. Okay? Ito yung enlarged version of protonephridia, which are usually found on the sides of the organism. Okay? Tinatawag din siya also na flame cells. Okay? And in some organisms, meron ka makikita na eye spot. Hindi siya gaya ng eyes na meron tayo sa human. What it can only do is to allow the organism to distinguish light intensity and to avoid strong lights that could possibly indicate the presence of predators. Okay? And in members of this phylum, some of them would have yung cilia, no, along the ventral side or yung part ng organism na that's facing the substrate that's used both for locomotion and attachment. And say for example, yung tapeworms that's found in the intestinal lumen of human, meron siya nung scolex. This is the totality of the scolex, and the scolex is made up of hooks for attachment and suckers for getting nutrients from its host. Okay, usually attached to the intestinal wall of this flatworm's host, and they're mostly hermaphroditic, and some of them are also known to be capable of asexual reproduction. So ito namang flatworms, some of them are free living, so they are under class Turbellaria. Yung flukes natin will be under Trematoda, and tapeworms will be under Cestoda. Okay? So sinabi ko kanina na it's a public health concern, no, yung flatworms, because of many diseases that it can cause to humans. So I think yung pinaka-common would be that of schistosomiasis. Schistosomiasis is a highly endemic disease in the Philippines, and it's actually caused by many species of schistosoma. Okay? And you can see in here, no, that it would start sa pag-hatch ng egg. You can start with this one, no, yung pag-hatch ng egg ng schistosoma, which is passed on to an intermediate host, usually a freshwater snail, and then it will tawag dyan, stay in this intermediate host for some time, and when the egg will hatch, it will go through the human host via skin penetration, usually yung sa paa. That is why it is not advised for, say for example, children and for anyone to like go barefoot in parts of the soil wherein it is constantly wet, no? Because there's a possibility that these trematodes, okay, will infect yung human. Say for example, yung ating mga rice farmers, di ba? For rice to grow, kailangan talagang may ano siya, it's constantly tawag dyan, basa, no? So usually yung rice farmers natin, if wala silang bota, it's really a problem, no? And this one is also for mga bata, kasi they are the ones na usually nakapaalang, no, in these swampy areas, no, or like for example yung sa mga mountainous areas. So usually yung common na presenting na diagnosis or like yung initial na diagnosis will be yung sa bloating, no? Yung pag yung enlarged belly. This is not actually the stomach that's enlarged, but it's rather the liver. Because this, tawag dyan, this organism, when it infects the host, would localize sa liver. Okay? So something that's really tawag dyan, this is actually a re-emerging disease in the Philippines. Okay? And lastly, we have phylum Rotifera. Rotifera naman, these are free-living animals, and usually they are inhabiting in freshwater ecosystems, although some can be found to thrive in seawater. So they are bilaterally symmetrical, so ibig sabihin meron din sila ng cephalization, and they are unsegmented pseudocoelomates. So yung pinagkaiba nila kay platyhelminthes, okay, they are pseudocoelomates. Kasi yung kanina, di ba, they are acoelomates. So meron na silang body cavity at this point. And yung body plan ng rotifers is composed of 3 sections. You have the mouth, you have the head, the trunk, which comprises the majority of the organism, and then the foot. You have the corona right here. This corona, mura na siya og ligid, no? Mura na siya ligid that's moving towards the mouth. And yung purpose nito is dalawa, for locomotion and at the same time also to capture food. So makikita nyo dito na mura siya, meron siya yung bristle-like structures. This is usually used to move and at the same time to filter and capture organisms and then move it or move the filtered organisms toward the mouth region. Okay? And yung pharynx naman ang ginagamit to further classify yung rotifers. So medyo marami yung types of rotifers. Hindi ko na siya sinali, but at least alam natin na yung morphology, no, ng jaw. Okay? It's more commonly called as the mastax. Okay? That's used to identify further or to classify further this phylum. The trunk is mainly composed of alimentary canal with 2 openings, both the mouth and the anus. So meron na siyang well-defined the mouth and then the anus. Okay? And the internal organs would lie in this grayish layer right here, no? We call the pseudocele, which is held by a hydrostatic skeleton. So most of them are planktonic, no? Although they can move in search for food, but when they are in water, some of them can be planktonic. Okay? And in terms of reproduction, they can both perform sexual and asexual reproduction. Okay? Merong union of gametes for sexual reproduction, and in the absence of fertilization, this ovary actually can later on become a myctic egg and then become a fully grown organism via the process of parthenogenesis. So di ba yun yung example ng parthenogenesis, no? Wherein it's actually the production of an embryo without any genetic contribution from the male gamete. Okay? So some of them can perform this type of reproduction. And because many of them are found in aquatic ecosystems, okay, they are usually used in aquaculture, say for example, as yung parang initial food, no, ng growing na fish. Kasi nga, it's observed na kapag natural yung food or buhay yung kinakain ng isda, mas mabilis siyang tumubo. Okay? So ganyan yung isa yun sa kanyang mga importance. Okay? So as a summary, you can just read, no? We only tackled yung about sponges or yung under phylum Porifera, phylum Nidaria, phylum Tinophora, phylum Platyhelminthes, and phylum Protifera for this lesson. Okay? And for the second part of our lesson for invertebrate diversity, tatapusin natin yung invertebrates. No? We are only left with nematodes, mollusks, annelids, and arthropods. So I hope this recording will help you and will clarify at kahit papaano your understanding on invertebrate diversity. And thank you very much uh, for your time. So if you have questions, please do not hesitate to call my attention. Okay? So God bless everyone. Bye bye.